From Acapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I'm here in Anarchapulco, as quite often I am, although I do travel a lot, and I have a first-time guest coming in. His name is Charlie Robinson, and I think it was about a year ago that I received an email or some sort of communication via the interweb from a person, and he said, I wrote this book and I quoted you in it, and I have literally a book on my Kindle of about 40 books I need to read, and I was like, well, I don't have time to read the whole thing, but I looked kind of quickly at it, and I was like, this looks really, really good, and has a lot of the same sort of information I kind of talk about on various formats, whether it's the Dollar Vigilante or Anarchast or whatever, talking about what's actually going on, who's controlling things, how does this whole system work? Is it a true system? Is there people actually in control of this thing? Is it a true conspiracy worldwide? And I think sort of the answer is kind of yes, but like how exactly is it all set up? How does it work? It's really quite confusing. So I got a communication from Charlie Robinson, and he forwarded me his book, which came out last summer, called The Octopus of Global Control. And definitely check it out. It's on Kindle and Amazon and all that. We'll have the links to that all down below. And if you're into this kind of stuff, and you'll see if you're interested by hearing from him right now. So he's coming in from Denver, Colorado. And Charlie, great to talk to you. First question I have to ask you, though, is how did you become an anarchist?
I became an anarchist once I got clear on what the definition of it was. And I put the quote from Stefan Molyneux in my book. And it says, the word anarchy does not mean no rules. It does not mean kill others for fun. It does not mean no organization. It simply means without a political leader. And when I read that, I said, I'm on board with that for sure. We've got to try something different, because what we've been doing so far, it's not working. So yeah, I became an anarchist once I understood, first of all, what it meant, and second of all, was it feasible? And the answer is, of course, it's feasible. We're led to believe it's not, of course, because there are people with vested interest in keeping us ignorant to the fact that we can do a lot of this stuff on our own. But yeah, once I got clear on what it really means, I decided I was in.
That's great. And you say what we're doing isn't working. That's kind of an interesting way to put it, because we, as in you or I, as individuals, aren't really doing anything in relation to this whole system, but they are doing stuff, and for whatever reason, they've got most of humanity still kind of enslaved, still kind of going along with the system, still confused by it all, which I totally understand why they're confused, because they're doing so many things in so many different ways. And you talk about this in your book, just, the title is perfect, The Octopus of Global Control. It's got tentacles everywhere, and it's really hard for your average person to even get their head around. Where do we even start with this? I guess one of the interesting things about you is that you kind of woke up, from what I know or what we've talked about. You were in real estate during the housing crisis, housing boom and bust that happened around 2008, 2009. It all fell apart around that time. And that's when it kind of, you started actually investigating. It's kind of interesting because it was very similar for me, because it was after the 2001 tech bubble collapse, and this happens like almost every 7 years. It hasn't been 7 years this time, which is kind of interesting, but almost every 7 years, I started looking into what's the Federal Reserve. Then I went down the rabbit hole, and what happened really on 9/11? Oh, really? Not exactly what they said on TV. Go, go, go. So I was like about 7 years ahead of you. It looks like you kind of woke up to this around the housing crisis. Why don't you give your sort of perspective on how you started looking into this stuff?
Well, if there is a pump and dump scheme, I have lost money in it, believe me. Whether it was the .com, and it always starts off with making a little bit of money, of course. So with the .com, I rode that thing like crazy. I was day trading. I was into it all. I remember waking up, owning a stock called Commerce One, and in the morning before I went to the gym, the stock 3-for-1 split, and then went up 70 points. So you're talking about $210 I went to the gym. On my way, but when I came back about an hour and a half later, the stock was down 10. So it was not only not up 70, 3-for-1, but it was down 10. And I was like, oh my God, this is a disaster. So I got my first taste of sort of the fraud, the pump and dump mentality and the fraud back in the .com bubble, like you did. I know you had your company, and you had like a front row seat for that. I had a front row seat in Las Vegas. I worked in new home sales from 2003 to 2012. So I wrote it up and wrote it down. And I worked for a couple of the largest home builders in town. And there was a point when sales started to fizzle out a little bit. And when that happened, because the home builders had such a huge stake in terms of land and money invested, they couldn't afford for that to happen for too long. So they devised a scheme that they would call incentive money, right? They got the customers trained when they come in the front door to buy a new home, they would sort of ask, hey, what are the incentives? Now, it could have been it used to be something as simple as, hey, we'll buy down your interest rate, or we'll cover your closing costs, things like that. But as it started to stall, and as these loan programs that had been around started to disappear, literally day by day by day, the loan programs would go away. They started to, they came up with a way to stimulate these sales. So think of the incentive as like a bucket of money. The home community where I was selling, we were selling houses that were maybe between $400,000 and $500,000. So you have a $500,000 house. $100,000 of incentive money to play with. Now, you would use that to buy down someone's interest rate. You would use that to cover their closing costs. These are all normal things, and there's nothing wrong with those. But we decided we would allow them to take it right off the price of the house. So you'd take a $500,000 house, take $100,000 off, pay $400,000 for it. Once that wasn't enough to stimulate the sales, it became, well, let's see how else we can spend this money. Husband's got a credit card, wife has a credit card, we'll pay those off. Car payments, we'll pay those off. Now that you don't have all this debt, now let's run your ratios again, and magically you qualify. Well, that's mortgage fraud. I mean, flat out, that's what it was. So we're sitting in a sales meeting, our sales manager comes across and says, this is what we're doing from now on. Of course, I raised my hand, like everyone in that room expected, because I have a big mouth, and I pretty much like to call, like if I see some nonsense, I'm going to say something about it, especially when I have a real estate license at play. I raised my hand and said, we cleared this with our legal department. And his words were, I'd rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. We're screwed. My buddy is like, this is not okay. What we're doing is not okay. My friend, one of the guys I worked with, he, in order to get a guy qualified, he paid off the guy's Porsche with this money. It's great, if you're the guy that's coming in to try and buy the house. But if you wonder why things crumble, if you wonder why this was a house of cards, part of the reason is because there was rampant fraud going on there. So when it happened, when the house of cards came down, people were looking or trying to, who are we going to blame? We're going to blame Wall Street. Well, the reality was that the mortgage companies that were creating these home loans, that were selling them to people that really shouldn't have been buying a house in the first place, it was a hot potato, and they knew they weren't going to hold it for longer than maybe a day or two. So as soon as that sales transaction happened, house closed, people moved in, that loan program became a thing, they packaged it up, handed it off to Wall Street, which it was then packed into those collateralized debt obligations, the CDOs and things like that, and put into sort of a mortgage sausage, stamped AAA, and sold to suckers on Wall Street as being great investments, which of course they weren't. And then if you read, the Big Short, you can see how that housing market, how Goldman Sachs was creating funds like Abacus, and which was a fund filled with soon-to-be non-performing housing assets, and then selling them to their customers, and then betting against them. It was totally, it's insanity. So when the book The Big Short came out, and then later the movie, I was like, well, yeah, this was like a documentary to me. So that is where I saw firsthand the fraud. Now, about the exact time that this is happening, we're talking like 2007, I read John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and that just changed my life, and it filled in a lot of these questions that I had about the fraud. Because now I understood 9/11, and I got the false flag things, and that all made sense to me. I didn't understand it in detail like the way I do now, but I understood the components of it. But Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that book explained how John Perkins worked for a company called Maine, which was a multinational engineering firm similar to Halliburton, KBR, or Bechtel these days. And they would enslave third world countries by pitching them on projects, hydroelectric power plants. Say, well, we'll come into Ecuador. We'll build a hydroelectric power plant here. It's going to generate this much electricity. You're going to have the benefits of things like that. Your children will learn to read because there will be lights in your house at night. You'll have lighting in your schools. You'll have money. It will be great. All this stuff. And that was the sales pitch. And of course, countries like Ecuador said, sure, fine, we'll sign on to that. That sounds good. We want all those things. Well, the problem is it's a rigged game. And there was never going to be enough revenue generated to offset what the payments were. So, and that was intentional. So you get a couple of years down the road, and these hydroelectric power plants are producing, but not producing the way they thought, the way you thought they were going to produce. And so you're having a hard time making your payments. And like any loan shark, they come up to you afterwards and they say, you're late, buddy, on this month's payment, but we can work something out. And that was the intention all along. Now that might be that they want you to vote their way in a UN resolution, or they want you to privatize the lumber industry and help them sell out, and allow them to have their friends come in and buy that up for pennies on the dollar, or allow a military base to get built there, or to do something else that they don't really want to do, in effect to help pay down that debt that they have accrued. So it's a dirty game, and it's set up by the World Bank and the IMF in the money that is supposed to come in, to build this great thing, never actually flows into the country, so to speak. It goes from the World Bank to, in his book, the company was called Maine that he worked for. They no longer exist, but the money goes from the World Bank to Halliburton to come in and build all these things out. And it makes more sense now, because as I'm reading that book in 2007, I'm going, oh yeah, this is exactly what's happening in Iraq. This is what's happening in Afghanistan. This is the plan. And so between reading the book, reading John Perkins' book, and then living this sort of mortgage fraud on, real life, I was understanding exactly how rigged the game was, and how maybe it was Ecuador in the 60s that they were running this scam on, but right now they're running it, they were running it in the United States back then. And if you weren't sure of that, all you had to do was fast forward a couple of years and see who came to the rescue and bought all of these distressed assets. Goldman Sachs, all these hedge funds and investment banks came in and spent billions of dollars buying up all these houses for, a tenth of what they should have been paying, and sticking renters in there. And so, so that was how I saw it. That was where I got a front row seat to that. And, it was fraud on an unimaginable scale, and I'm fearful that that's the plan again. I don't know why they would, they're so good at it. I don't know why they would stop and not do it a second time around. And here we are, sky high real estate prices, and it's coming again. Mark my words.
Yeah, you brought up so many things. It's really hard to know where to even start. The Economic Hitman book, that was another book that I read fairly early on. For me, was The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin was the gateway sort of wake-up call to how some of these things work and how this is not what we were told it is. Then I read that Hitman book, I think around 2008, off the top of my head. It was probably around then. And started piecing together what's going on. And there's a lot of people out there, and I hear this a lot, especially from people who call themselves anarchists or voluntarists or whatever you want to call us, people who believe that humans shouldn't be slaves, is there's quite a few of them are very rational and logical, to the point where if we don't have absolute proof of every single thing, like in a science book, in whatever, then they're like, well, that's a conspiracy theory, and you guys are a little wacko for me because I need to see like the dots connected. And I think that's sort of, to an extent, kind of what you're doing with your book, and many other people are doing. People like David Icke, who will be speaking at Anarchapulco, and Mark Passio, who spoke last year. I don't know if he's going to be speaking next year, but he spoke last year at Anarchapulco. And these are people who are kind of like piecing the dots together and figuring out how this whole system works. But there's a lot of people, and I know a lot of them, and they are friends of mine, and no offense to them at all, but they're like, well, all this stuff is just a natural way that things just work. There's no real sort of plan behind it all. And I'm like, okay, well, you look at the real estate crisis, and we just talked about the tech crisis that I went through 7 years before that. You went through the real estate one. You can look at it from a purely just, okay, there's no conspiracy at all here. This is just what's going to happen when you have a system like this with a central bank, which is a tenet of communism, which manipulates interest rates, which can print up money at will and rescind that money supply at will. When they do that, you're going to always have these booms and busts, and that's the very Austrian economic sort of view of things, and totally fine. I agree with that. But they don't take it that next step further and go, because you can kind of see, okay, yeah, you have these booms and busts because there is central banking. That's actually just pretty clear to see. But then why does it get so crazy, and why does it always seem to happen, and how it seems to happen? There's definitely I'd say like the most people that are involved in these things, whether it be like the real estate people or the Goldman Sachs people or whoever they are, it's mostly greed focused. So they're right on that they have this system, and then people just get greed to the point where it becomes super fraudulent, and it all just at some point just collapses. But I think there's something more than that, and especially at the higher levels. They really understand that they're doing these things more or less on purpose to a higher agenda. And a lot of people will say, yeah, but what's the agenda? They've already got trillions of dollars, people like the Rothschilds and all that. It's actually, in my opinion, not really about money necessarily. There's definitely a money component, but it's mostly about power. And so I'd like to get your opinion on that. Like when you're trying to explain to someone how you see what's going on in the world, how would you explain it? Like how I was just trying to explain. How do you explain why all these things are happening, and what are the reasons?
Yeah, it's about control. Oh, my head can't get down. They've got all the money in the world, so it's not necessarily about money, but it's about the control that money brings. And if you have a central bank, it is a rigged game. It is set up in a way that it is going to explode at some point. You've done this with Dollar Vigilante for years and years, explaining this. You probably have done more to educate people about finance than the entire United States school system has done in its history. And that is a compliment, but it's not the biggest compliment in the world, because the United States education system has set out to disinform people for years and years, because they don't want you to understand this. If you understand how it works, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to understand that a central bank system is a rigged game. It requires no conspiracy theory background at all. It's just math. You just have to understand that there is have a finite supply of money, and there is not enough money to pay back the interest that is accrued from that without creating more money. And to call it a carnival game and a Ponzi scheme is an accurate statement. That's what it is. It is a rigged game. Now, I was taught as a kid that the Federal Reserve was a public institution. That's a lie. Then somewhere along the line it changed, and it was termed a quasi-public institution, which, whatever that means, it's still not right. It is a private bank, as private of a bank as any other bank. And it's the greatest scam in the history of mankind to impose these, you talk about the creature from Jekyll Island, to impose the central bank on the United States was the greatest scam in the history of this country. And that is not something that I think people really understand. And the reason why they don't understand it is because the people running the show have ties, of course, to the banking industry. They don't want you to know, because the minute you understand this, it becomes quite clear the whole system is a fraud. And you, and I have to participate in it because we're required to pay for things in dollars. Now, you have gotten into the cryptocurrency world, and that is obviously the future because it removes power from idiots and scumbags that are running the world and hands it off to everyone else, maybe some idiots too, but at least it removes the power. It removes the power from those that currently have it. And I've talked about the 8 tentacles of control in my book, scientific, medical, covert, military, religious, things like that. But the most dangerous to me, I have been very clear, is the banking. And it's dangerous because, for one, you don't really think about it. You don't see it coming. You can understand that the military component is dangerous because it directly leads to bombs being dropped on your head. But the banking component is even more deadly because it's a silent killer and it gets blamed on other things. And people don't really understand that, you think that you wonder about Yemen as an example of a place that is getting demolished by bombs and starvation. Well, what's causing the starvation? It's the banking, actually. It's the embargoes. It's the prevention of money from flowing into there. So banking is used as a
weapon of mass destruction
for squeezing the life out of people, whether it's economic sanctions, which the United States loves their economic sanctions that they place on people that aren't towing the party line. I tell people that for me, as far as like to wake them up, are you understanding the plan? What's really going on? I feel like I've yelled and screamed as much as I can. In the book, what I did in order to bring in this to help me paint the picture a little bit better was I brought in quotes from over 500 different people that had some impact, had some involvement in these really important issues. So I felt like their words carried a lot more weight. You could hear someone say something. You could hear, and it wasn't just Rockefeller and Rothschilds, although they're in there quite a bit. A lot of it was, George Carlin and Bill Hicks, because they can do it in a way that's funny. They can get their point across while making you laugh at the same time. Let's face it, some of the topics in the book are depressing because you're talking about people being controlled by others, and it's a horrible, horrible thing. But just because it's depressing, just because there's some negative things in here, doesn't mean that we should bury our heads in the sand. So between the quotes and my twisted sense of humor, I felt like those things were needed in order to sort of give the proper context to the book, to understand that this is not something new. This is not a new problem that we're experiencing. One of the first quotes I have in there is from John Francis Hyland, who was the mayor of New York City in 1922, and he's talking about the octopus that is infiltrating the city. And he's talking about, in his terms, he puts it in Standard Oil, is what he's talking about. But you take the word Standard Oil out, and you read the whole thing, and you go, oh my God, this guy's talking about today. But it's from 1922 when he was the mayor of New York City. And you realize that the problems that we have, the things that we're going through right now are not new. They're century old, at least. And they've been put in place by people that have a very detailed timeline, and they are not afraid. This is a multi-generational plan. They're not afraid if they don't see it all happen during their lifetime. And you have to give them credit in a weird sort of way for having that sort of long view of retooling society. So for me, the best way that I've been able to express what's going on is actually through using other people's words. So that's why in the books you'll get the words from, you mentioned David Icke. He's in there quite a bit, but not just good guys fighting on the side, Also Adolf Hitler. I think Adolf Hitler I quoted the most in there, not because I'm a fan of his work, but because the guy was incredibly insightful in terms of how to control a society. Obviously, part of that goes into disarming the population. And there's a title, one chapter, it's called You Disarm the Populace Before the Slaughter. And that's a quote from Mao. So talking about anarchy and removing these leaders, the reason why you'd want to remove a leader is because a lot of them, once they get to these high levels, tend to want to thin out the herd. And that usually doesn't mean them. It always means us. And they have a strategy for doing that. And one of the strategies that they have is to ban firearms at first, because obviously it's easier to control people when they don't have guns. So that's a chapter I get into that has to do with overt, say, physical, actual control, as opposed to a more esoteric control, such as like the media or banking, things that are sort of off to the side.
Yeah, again, you mentioned so much that I don't even know where to begin. I think on the central banking part and trying to explain to people what a complete absolute scam, like it's just math, as you pointed out, like it's completely provable this is just a scam. And probably one of the biggest ones ever, definitely one of the biggest in the world. There might be one or two bigger. I don't even want to go there, but like central banking is it's a top three for sure, absolutely. And you actually brought up just why it's so important, and I agree with that. And that's part of the reason I started the Dollar Vigilante. If you look at our tagline, essentially says, or my bio I often use, it essentially says I'm a anarcho-capitalist, libertarian, freedom fighter against mankind's two biggest enemies, the state and the central banks. And really, without the central banks, most of their other power control systems go down dramatically. For example, the military. That almost every war is financed by central banking. Ron Paul had a great quote. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in your book. If it isn't, it'll be in part 2. That it's no coincidence that the century of total war was a century of central banking, and that was the 20th century. Had hundreds of millions of people dead in these you call them wars. It's basically just planned slaughters on purpose by the elites, with all the propaganda telling people, oh, it's a good thing, and oh, we beat the bad Germans. Doug Stanhope has one of the best sort of YouTube that you can find on there. Just look up Doug Stanhope Nationalism. In fact, let's put up a couple seconds of that now, Pete. Just look up Doug Stanhope Nationalism and find the part where he talks about how, we were in there garroting Krauts. Let's put in that part right now.
Nationalism does nothing but teach you how to hate people that you never met, and all of a sudden you take pride in accomplishments you had no part in whatsoever, and you brag about. Check my pants, there's no mud stains on the knees from where we were garroting Krauts in the trenches at Verdun. I think we didn't do anything but watch sports bloopers while we got hammered. I think we should shut the fuck up.
Everything. People are so confused about what's going on. This is all on purpose, and it's so hard to explain to people. And I guess that's another reason why it's good your book's out, and I hope more people just keep putting this information out in various ways to wake up more and more people. And the thing is, Charlie, I wonder if people really want to be woken up at this point. We're talking at a time right now where Kanye West has just come out, and there's an uproar that he just said that, well, if you had slavery for 400 years, that sounds like a choice. And a lot of people are up in arms about it.
You hear about slavery for 400 years? For 400 years, that sounds like a choice. Like, you was there for 400 years and it's all of y'all?
But that's actually kind of true, because what you're kind of saying there is you've got thousands and thousands of people being ruled by a couple people for 400 years. At some point, obviously the people are very confused, same as today, right, about being slaves at all. I think it was Harriet Tubman who said, I freed 1,000 slaves, I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. There's no difference between the time of 1700s black slavery to complete global slavery we have today. There's no difference except for it's now completely institutionalized on all facets. And again, just like back then, most people don't know they're slaves. And then the ones who do, actually, a lot of them seem quite happy about being slaves. It almost makes you just kind of wonder, do people even want to be woken up to this sort of information? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the best slave is the one that doesn't know that they're a slave. And that's where we are. We have become slaves to a variety of things. The media, for sure. think about what Obama did in 2013. There's a thing called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. Now, the Smith-Mundt Act it banned propaganda in the United States. It banned us from propagandizing our own people in the United States. Okay, so that had been in play for a while. So somebody decided that had to go. So they did the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. So what that said is, well, we won't change that. We don't really need that. You know, that whole "we're not going to use propaganda on you" thing. We need to get rid of that because there's some propaganda coming your way, so that actually required effort to go get out and do that, to put that into place, because to do nothing would have left the act, the Smith-Mundt Act, in place, and you would not be allowed to propagandize against the Americans. So somebody decided, and of course Obama signed it into law, that had to go. So think about that for a second. That's about when the false flags started too. Now, not all the false flags, but some of the local ones, the drills that were passed off as being real events and things like that. You have to wonder why. So they planned on using propaganda against us. Yeah, I mean, frankly, I feel like propaganda has been used against us for a long time, way before that. But I guess now they just decided to make it official, put a ring on it.
Well, they also kind of made it legal. I think that's part of it. I think, in my mind, because you mentioned there was obviously false flags before that, 9/11 being the biggest of them all, in my opinion, at least on a U.S. soil. And I think what happened there is they started to realize people were figuring out that this was a false flag, and they started to get really scared. And then they really ramped up the war of terror and just try to get everyone still scared, so they're not looking at who actually did it. and then I think they're like looking at the media on the internet and going, uh-oh, like people are seriously starting to find out the truth, and that it's not the bad Muslims or the bad Russians or the bad Jews or there's some bad Jews, there's some bad everyone. But no, it's like us, they're going to find out. So they're like, well, let's start actually putting this so it's actually legal to do at least. So at least they can't use the governmental system. If they somehow get some sort of control of that, what if Adam Kokesh gets in and he says, okay, let's investigate this. At least we'll go, well, it's legal. It was legal to do it at the time. I think they're starting to plan for, they're very smart. They're incredibly smart, like almost otherworldly smart. The way this whole thing's set up, and then you could go into, I don't even know if we want to go here, but look at the Bible, the devil and God, and the devil's, the Bible says at some point the devil will have it, so everything everyone believes on earth is a lie. That's generally where we are now. So is this like a spiritual battle going on, or do these people have access to some sort of extra information? And then we get into the secret societies, the Masons. The whole U.S. was founded upon that. We could go into that as a whole other topic, but actually, and I think I cut you off, and if I did, and I know I did, but I don't remember where you were going with it. But and we can come back to whatever point you're trying to make there. But I kind of want to hit on this at the moment because I'm on a bit of a roll with what I'm thinking here. You brought up earlier that these people seem to have like a generational plan, which is kind of crazy. Well, I guess not, right? I guess we all many people plan for their families and the future and their grandsons and future grandsons. But it almost seems like, and from what I'm hearing, we can get into like really crazy down the rabbit hole stuff here, that with all the stuff they're doing, and we don't know. I've never seen. There's no proof on YouTube yet of them actually killing babies and drinking their blood and all that kind of stuff. But you hear they do this kind of stuff, and I wonder. And I've heard that some of them think that they're going to come back and reincarnate into like this line again. And this also goes back to biblical stuff with the Anunnaki, and David Icke brings it up as there's kind of like lizard people. They're not fully human. Like, what's your thoughts? I know I just threw like a huge bomb of stuff in your plate here, but what's your thoughts generally on what I just said?
I'll tell you what. Well, so with regard to David Icke, and he covers a variety of topics. Obviously, the most polarizing of all of them is the reptilian thing. I'll tell you what, though. He has been so right on so many things. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on just about anything at this point, just because I am willing to admit that I don't know it all. I do think so. You look at somebody like the Bush family. In the book, I speculate that they are probably the worst family, one of the worst families on Earth, with the Windsors or whoever they are these days, up at the top. There is, and now that doesn't come from just, I'm parroting what David Icke says. You can read the words of these people, and they sound like lunatics. They sound like, I'm not religious, so I don't naturally go to that they sound like Satanists, but they sound like Satanists. I mean, they sound like that's what they're into, talking about, you've got Prince Philip saying that he wishes, when he dies, he wants to reincarnate as a deadly virus so that he can wipe out most of the population. I mean, have you taken a look at that guy's teeth? I mean, who's to say he's not currently a virus? So you've got people like that saying that. You've got, George Bush saying, if they ever found out what we did, they would chase us down the streets and hang us. Really, why? H.W. Bush, we're talking about. Because you did such a good job. Why? Because you've screwed the world. And that's what you set out to do. It's a weird mentality to wake up each day and try and come up with new ways to enslave humanity. That must require a lot of effort and a very bizarre mind frame. But there is something to the multi-generational plan also being tied to multi-generational satanic rituals and abuse. And like a lot of these things, you find out about the child abuse rings that are being run by the quote elite. That's always been known to be multi-generational, in that if you are somebody that is abused, there's a large chance that you will become an abuser yourself, and then that just sort of perpetuates this horrible cycle. And those things have been documented for years and years, that they're trying to keep the quote bloodline, whatever that actually means. Now, if you want to go down the Anunnaki thing, or if you just want to talk about bloodlines in terms of wealth preservation, there's this inbreeding and sort of crossbreeding between all these maniacs. And one of the things that happens when you crossbreed or when you inbreed is that you wind up with crazy people in your family. And I think that there's a very logical case that can be made that the people that are running the planet, they're running these governments, and the people probably above them are psychopaths, maniacs. I mean, in the purest form. So it wouldn't be surprising to me to find out that the people that are running the show are, baby killing, blood drinking maniacs, because a lot of them act like they have kuru, which is the disease you get when you're a cannibal. And things like, I don't know, falling down all the time and saying crazy things. Hillary Clinton. So you've got examples of this sort of nonsense over generations. And so David Icke took a beating for years and years about his reptilian things, but I'm telling you that there's probably more to that than people are willing to understand. But that is like the black belt of conspiracy theory. Like, you can't just jump right into reptilians, or people just go, you know what, I'm out of here. You guys are tinfoil hat wearing maniacs, and everything that you say is I'm going to discard everything you say. That's dangerous, because there's a lot of things out there that are easily proven, and they slap that conspiracy theory label on it because the CIA came up with that plan. They came up with that label as a way to discredit people. They use it because it works really well. People don't like to be marginalized. They don't like to be. They don't like to be told that they're crazy. They don't like people rolling their eyes at them. What's funny though is, if you're a conspiracy theorist who's done the work, who's researched, who's looked into this, who has a legitimate interest in these topics, that you can't have a conversation with somebody else because they don't have any facts. They don't have anything. They just say, well, I saw it on TV. You're nuts. And that's about it. But if you want to actually drag facts and research into these arguments, you'll dismantle them, because they haven't done the work to understand how understand how this all works. Now, for me, the one event that was the trigger was 9/11 in general and Building 7 in particular. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think a lot of people saw that. And if you have a discussion with someone about that, if they even know that a third building fell on 9/11, they'll say, well, you're not a structural engineer. Right, I'm not a structural engineer. Do I need to be? Do I need to be a structural engineer to understand that building came down at free fall speed? There's a trap that gets set by people. And that is that you, the quote conspiracy theorist, they try to saddle you with the responsibility of proving how it happened. That's not your job. That's not your responsibility. You, the mainstream media, tried to sell that turd of 9/11 to us. It's your responsibility to prove it, not ours. All I have to do is prove that your story is incorrect, and it is incorrect, and it's easily provable. But when CNN comes out and says, 2 days after the event, a hijacker's passport was found at the foot, blocks away from the World Trade Center, if you can believe that. No, we can't believe that. We shouldn't have to believe that, and we refuse to believe that. We're not going to believe that because it's a lie. And just because you're on television in a suit and tie saying it doesn't make it true. And how dare you? I mean, it's like that quote is in my book, and it's like the guy saying it worked at CNN. It's as if he can't believe the words are actually coming out of his mouth, because he even understands how preposterous this story was, that Mohammed Atta's passport fell at the foot of an FBI agent 3 blocks away in perfect condition. I mean, give me an effing break. It's ridiculous, and it's insulting to my intelligence, and yet people believe it. So for all those people out there that say, well, you're a conspiracy theorist and everything, I quote the great Jim Marrs. It's not a conspiracy theory if you can prove it. But we don't actually have to prove it a lot of times. We just have to, what we have to do is expose the official stories, the official lies for what they are, and tell them, no, the burden of proof's on you. You prove it. You're trying to convince me of this, of 9/11 happening the way it happened, box cutters and all that stuff. That's retarded. You proved the story to me. It's not the other way around. I don't have to tell you if it was nanothermite, directed energy, or a suitcase nuke in the basement of the Twin Towers. I don't know. But I will tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't 19 Arab hijackers that hit it with an airplane and then watched the thing pancake into itself at free fall speed and turn into dust. That, I'm positive, is not the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up again so many things I don't even know where we could go on. This could be a 12-hour interview, but unfortunately I don't have the energy anymore, and most people have ADD. I'm sure a lot of people would love to just see this go on for 12 hours, but we kind of went really deep down the rabbit hole there, and we started talking about satanic lizard people that are drinking baby's blood and stuff. And I just got to throw that in there because I think there is something to all that stuff. But then you brought it back to just facts. This is just factual information. And you brought it up with a thing that kind of just like hit home with me just now on how it was really 9/11 that woke me up too. Because what happened, just briefly, had an internet company, went to hundreds of millions of dollars, fell apart. My partner tried to kill himself. It was almost worthless. When he got out of the hospital, he brought me a book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. I read it. I went, why didn't anyone tell us this? I would have known to sell the company or take some profits before the tech bubble collapsed. Went on for a few years after that on my sailboat, and the next big thing that happened was I watched the documentary or movie or whatever you want to call it, the video Loose Change, which Luke Rudkowski was involved in. And actually, before I even mention that, I'll mention that, and then I'll get back to The Creature from Jekyll Island. So I watched Loose Change, and my jaw just dropped, and I was like, how did I not even notice almost all this stuff? It was like I was just completely hypnotized or something. Started looking into that, and both those two things really led me down the rabbit hole to everything else. And to me, it's just so interesting to me right now that I was at G. Edward Griffin's Red Pill Expo as one of their top speakers last year. He's come to my conference in Acapulco for the last 2 years. We're good friends now. And then Luke Rudkowski is also one of my best friends now.
He's the best. He does such great work.
Yeah, it's just so interesting how life is sometimes, the things that woke me up, the people that woke me up have become really good friends now and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, 9/11 was, that really I don't know. I rarely go anywhere anymore where anyone can even bring up in public that conspiracy theorists are crazy anymore. Like it's almost like almost everywhere I go now, if the topic does come up, everyone's like, yeah, inside job. And then one guy, you'll kind of see him getting all uncomfortable, and you'd be like, what? You think it was what they said on TV, and he might huff off or something. But it used to be, and it was only like about 10 years ago, you'd go to a cocktail party, 9/11, oh, those damn Muslims, this, that, that Michael Moore 9/11 Fahrenheit, that was good. It was actually kind of the Bushes, but not really, because it was really, and like, but if you went, no, it was actually, it was none of those things. It was like way deeper than that. Most people would just think you were absolutely nuts. And now it's really hard. Maybe I don't hang around the right circles. I'm sure there's some places you can go where people still believe the official story, but it's really, really rare now. I don't know about you. Have you found that?
Yeah, I used to use what I would call belief lubricant, or it'd be like, listen, I know this sounds crazy, but, and then go off on whatever it was. Then I don't feel the need to even use it really much anymore, because I know it sounds crazy is implied, first of all, and it's becoming common knowledge to me. Now I don't know if that's just because I'm involved in this and have a stake in it and have researched it and have made this a part of my life. But I think even just sort of the common everyday person that doesn't give it much thought, I think they're coming around to it. They did, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth did a really, really great ad campaign for the 15-year anniversary. They ran billboards and mobile billboards all around New York City, and their ad campaign was, did you know a third building fell on 9/11? Real simple. I mean, a real simple statement. And then they interviewed people in places like Times Square and, doing kind of the things that Luke does. And the reaction, I mean, obviously these things are edited. They interview a lot of people, but the reaction from a lot of people was, no, I didn't know a third building. What are you talking about? So there are still, 15 years afterwards, there's still a lot of people that are in the dark about that. There's a great video for people that are maybe new to this. I doubt they're watching your channel, but for people that are sort of new to it, if you find on the internet an interview with a guy named Danny Joanko, he is a demolition expert. He was a demolition expert in Europe. His family, multi-generations of being in the demolition business, and there is a guy that shows him a laptop video of a building coming down, and he says, tell me about this building just from looking at it. And he says, and Danny's saying in Dutch, he's saying it's a controlled demolition. And this guy's saying, well, listen, this is on 9/11. This is a building in New York City that came down on 9/11. And his reaction to it is just, it's priceless. He's just like, what? What do you mean? No. They said this happened on that same day. This was one of those buildings, and he's just going back and forth looking at it, and you can see the look in his face. He just becomes apart because he said it's a controlled demolition. That's what it is. And unfortunately, he died in a car accident about a week or so after that video was made. I don't know if that's that's where you can get into the conspiracy theorist part. Like, hey, was that intentional? I don't know, but. People, when they have that realization, like, so to me, Building 7, it was like a no-brainer. And like I said, you don't have to be a structural engineer to understand that building came down at free fall speed with a kink in the middle, and the fact that the BBC reported it falling 26 minutes before it actually did, kind of a red flag. So things like that woke me up. So when I wrote the book, my intention was I'm going to cover as many topics as I can. There's 50 of them in there. And because I don't know what will wake somebody else up. Like I said, for me, Building 7, that did it. For someone else, it might be Boston bombing. It might be, it might be something completely different. Because all it takes is one. And once it gets you, you go, well, that sounds weird. Then what about this? And then you dig a little deeper and you dig a little deeper and you wonder, well, wait a second. The Gulf of Tonkin started Vietnam, but that wasn't a real event. Or some people will say, well, that's not true. That's declassified. We're not even debating about whether or not these things are facts anymore. I mean, this information, there's a lot of information out there that's not debatable. You don't have to be a theory. There's no theory behind it. This is a fact. So once you understand that Vietnam was started over a totally bullshit reason, then you go, well, what about the other ones? What about this? What about that? What about World War II? What about World War I? What about all this stuff? And you start to find, you find Operation Northwoods, when these maniacs that were running the Pentagon were proposing that people come in and blow up a airliner over Miami and blame it on the Cubans in order to start World War III. And these were rejected by John Kennedy, of course, because he seemed to be a decent and rational human being. But
and then John Kennedy was killed.
with the Syria event now, what you're seeing is a false flag. You're seeing the same sort of playbook that was tried to be used for Operation Northwoods. You're seeing that for Syria, and people go, well, they're faking chemical attacks. Yeah, of course they are. That's what they do. Don't you understand? That's how they kick off wars. Because nobody in their right mind, if you're Assad in winning the war, are you going to all of a sudden decide, you know what I need to do? I need to stack the deck against me now and gas my own people and then create an international incident. You'd have to be insane. But now
it's happened like twice now with Syria.
A little bit more. Have a little bit more of an understanding that these are possibilities. So where in 9/11 people, oh my God, when it happened, it never occurred to the vast majority of people it could be a false flag. Now when you have Syria, I'd say half the people go, I'm not buying it. You're going to have to prove this to me because it sounds too much. It sounds too phony. Oh, and by the way, this is the third time you've tried to sell this turd to us of a chemical attack by Assad on his own people. Like, at least have the decency to mix it up a little bit and try and give us a brand new lie. But they don't even bother to do that because we're so dumbed down that they don't even, and they have so little respect for us that they almost don't even care anymore if they try and pass that same lie off over and over again.
They're also not that creative, I think, and as well, they're having to get better and better and faster at these things. So you brought up Syria, and I'm laughing. There's a lot of people dead over there thanks to the U.S. Department of Defense and the pentagram and all that. And it's super sad. But if I was crying, it'd be even worse. I like to. I don't know. I just kind of laugh. It's like, it's crazy. This is horrible. It's happening. But it was. It seems like every time they're about to pull out, the next day, all of a sudden, Assad attacks his own people. It just makes perfect sense, as you pointed out. But this time, I think I was in the U.S. Yes, I was in Europe. I was going to go to Syria. I was actually on my way basically there. I was going to go with Lubricant. And I was like, we've got to get there before the U.S. bombs it. And Luke's like, yeah, but we got to go really fast. They're going to bomb it soon. I'm like, I know. So I see, so Trump goes, we're going to pull out of Syria. And I'm like, here it is. And a lot of people, all the Trump guys go online. They go, see, he's all about peace. And then they're like, oh, but wait, Assad just gassed his own people. And I'm like, Luke and I are basically running for our computers. We're like in slow motion. We got to tell people before it's too late. And Trump bombed Syria. They're like, it was like a minute afterwards. They're like, oh, he just bombed their people? Boom, 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 boom. And it's like, oh man, it's just so obvious, to people like ourselves who pay attention, right? People just don't pay attention to this stuff. And part of the reason they don't pay attention is because they're working 3 jobs to pay their taxes and keep up with inflation, all by design. And you almost can't blame them too, they're just, people have been so enslaved and so exhausted, and, not a lot of people have a lot of time. And even if they do have the time, and I pointed this out earlier, a lot of people don't even want to know the truth. It's too scary or painful or whatever for them. But luckily, people they're almost being forced to wake up. The information's getting out too much now that, you kind of look like the idiot now if you don't know 9/11 was an inside job, whereas it was the exact opposite 15 years ago. You were the idiot if you thought it was an inside job, right? And that peer pressure really, really works. I've noticed that completely. All we really need, I've said this a few times, is at every cocktail party in the world, or wherever it is, that 1 or 2 out of every 10 people kind of have an idea about what we're talking about. Because what will happen is, because your average person doesn't know a lot either way, they'll just go along with what everyone else seems to be saying. So some guy might bring up, let's say there's 10 people at a cocktail party in New York City, and 9/11 somehow comes up, and one guy goes, oh, those damn Muslims. And then one other guy goes, What are you talking about? You know what really happened there, right? And the guy might go, well, yeah, I saw it on CNN, there was this and that. And then another guy might go, I just saw a video on YouTube, and now that's two, and now this guy's backing off because no one else is really, because they're all confused anyway. They don't really know what's going on. So all of a sudden, your average person who's just standing there and they're just going to go with whatever everyone else says is like, yeah, inside job, and it's basically over. And then it just goes from that to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. So I guess my point to this is people don't really want to wake up, but you almost having to now. And now they're trying, of course, to slow this down or stop it as much as possible. This is where all the Google and Facebook and YouTube censorship and shadow banning and outright just locking people off of those platforms is happening. Is because they realized a while ago they didn't know how to stop it. They're trying to deal with Google and YouTube and Facebook and all these, and basically control. Sort of that's all they know is like, let's buy all the top companies and then just start censoring and all that kind of stuff. But there's one difference between television programming and the internet is you can turn off or you can control the biggest sites, but that doesn't mean the other ones people can't get to them. They might, you can block them in various forms, but not completely, really. And so that information can still get out there. So it's a really interesting time that all these things are all happening at once. And isn't it so interesting, Charlie, that most people have no idea any of this stuff's even going on. This is such a important time in human history, and I'm sure everyone said that throughout history, that this is a very important time, and it probably was at the time, and maybe there's probably going to be more important times in the future. I don't know, but this is such a confluence of this power structure falling apart, but still trying to keep control, and all these other things happening. And your average person just watches football or whatever and doesn't even has no idea this is all going on.
We have outsourced our critical thinking. We have been convinced over the last generation or so that thinking is difficult and it's too hard, and they'll do it for us, and we can just sit back and consume this information. There's a weird thing that happens with a story that a new news event, breaking news, let's just say. Whatever story is told first gets stuck in people's heads. Every other story is saddled with the responsibility of knocking that first one out of the driver's seat. So no matter how preposterous it is, if CNN, MSNBC, Fox, these companies, there's a rush to be the first to set the narrative to drive this sort of story, even if the story is so stupid and so obviously fake that it makes no sense. They don't care. They'll push it anyway. I lived in Las Vegas for a long, long time, and on the morning of the Las Vegas shooting, one of the things that struck me was almost immediately was the lone gunman story was being pushed. So when you have a narrative that happens immediately and is pushed by every news organization all at the same time, to me, that's usually a red flag. That means that something bad is going on. And with the shooting like that, my initial thought was, first of all, how do you have it all figured? How do you know in 3 hours that it was a lone gunman? Okay, take your time on this. CNN, dig around. It's okay if you say we don't know all. It's madness. It's mayhem. There's still so much to figure out. They didn't do that though. That wasn't what they did. They didn't say we're investigating this. What they did was they said lone gunman. Anything to the contrary was completely, dismissed. But so the media has this really weird strategy that they use. They'll set the narrative right off the bat and push that. Anybody that contradicts that is labeled as crazy. That's one of the reasons why there's so much of a fight against the independent journalists. People like you, people that have these channels on YouTube and that are doing really great work. Well, guess what? You guys aren't sitting in a daily news meeting where your boss is saying, this is what we're talking about today. This is how we're talking about it. This is the plan. You're going to talk about whatever you want to talk about. When I see something like the Parkland shooting and you've got these interviews that are on TV and on on Good Morning America, and you've got one of the teachers explaining to the person asking the question. He said, I hear the shooting, I stick my head outside the hallway, and what I see is what she called Full Metal Jacket, I think was how she described it, was that she said, oh, that's interesting. I can't believe there's a cop already here dressed like that in the all black. And, talking about shooting. What does the interviewer do? They do nothing. What they should have said, whoa, stop. The shooter was wearing all black helmet, had a machine gun and things, a gun that you'd never seen before, and you thought it was a cop, and it turned out that was a shooter. That's an important topic. That's something that maybe the reporter should follow up on. Of course, they blindly just go, oh, that sounds terrible. Really, you know why it sounds terrible to me? Is because it doesn't fit the narrative. That's not what they were saying. They were talking about some lone crazed kid that had gone nuts and was shooting up the hallway. And then you get a teacher that says, there was a guy in all black battle fatigues with a machine gun that I thought was a cop who was doing the shooting. And the media just completely turns a blind eye to that. This is what you've got. Now, if you or have a YouTube channel and you're putting out your news and you're saying this is a legit interview that we should be talking about, we should be asking follow-up questions about this, about why this teacher who saw the shooting has such a vastly different story from the rest of the media. If you're a YouTube channel doing that, they're going to shut you down. They're going to give you 3 strikes for being whatever, make it up and try and take your channel down, because you're exposing something. You're talking about something that they can't control. And that narrative, it gets away from them, and they can't have that. So you saw that in Las Vegas. You saw that in Parkland. You're going to see it more and more and more when these stories don't seem to add up early on, when there's something wrong about them to you. That's your intuition telling you that you're being lied to. And you should dig a little bit deeper, and you should uncover this. And hey, listen, if the person giving the interview was wrong about this, that's fine. But the fact that there were no follow-up questions being asked about things like that is alarming. I mean, it should be alarming. Apparently, it's par for the course now with the mainstream media. There's no dissenting voices allowed. If you step out of line, they will squish you and turn off your channel and make you look like a tinfoil hat wearing maniac. But the reality is that all you really have to do is start questioning some of these things. Like, just raise your hand. Laura Loomer raised her hand in the meeting in the Las Vegas and said, I have a question. What about these other shootings? How about the fact that this guy checked into the hotel a couple days earlier than your timeline? Get her out of here. Was there a response? Not, what are you talking about? Give us that information. That sounds like it'd be really important. That was not the response they got. The response she got was, get the F out of this meeting right now. You're messing with us. We're not going to have any fake news going on here, meaning news that does not coincide with the official narrative that's being pushed. That's where we are. We have to actually take some responsibility for this.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think people realize just how much mainstream media is just propaganda. Like, there's no other way to put it. It has absolutely zero to do with actually getting real, truthful information out to the public. And I learned this firsthand, and it's one of the only times I wish I had a secret camera or a pen camera on. And actually, I bought one right afterwards for Luke Rudowski and Dan Dick, Suppress for Truth, because they were both there when it happened. I said, if we got that on video, do you know how huge that would have been? And it was when I snuck into Bilderberg. It was the first people who had ever really snuck in. And I have a way of doing things. I don't even understand how. I don't know what happens, but I can kind of get wherever I want to go. I don't know why, but I can do that. And I did that at Bilderberg, and Dan and Luke were pretty shocked. And we went to the main hotel bar, and the only people in the whole hotel were the White House press corps. And I didn't know who they were. I don't watch television. I don't pay attention to any of these people or anything. And Luke especially, his jaw dropped. He said, this is the elite of the mainstream media here. And I was like, really? And we started talking to them, and we said, so Bilderberg's tomorrow. I can't believe you guys are here. And they're like, what's Bilderberg? They were actually leaving the next morning, right before Bilderberg started. We got talking a little bit more. And as we did, we were telling them what we do, and they went, oh, and we're like, why are you covering Bilderberg? And they're like, oh, you guys don't understand. We're not journalists. Oh, we just do as we're told. What you guys do, it sounds like, is real journalism, and that's great. No, but we're not journalists. We just sort of read off the teleprompters, and they told us. And I was like, oh, that's what you do? And they're like, yeah, well, we got a mortgage, we got bills to pay, we just do what we're told. And that's basically it. So for your average person out there, if you're watching any of that, like, I don't care what it is. And they will always, one president comes in, he's like, oh, this one's bad, CNN's bad, but Fox is really good. And then the next one comes in, he's like, Fox is really bad, but CNN's really good. No, they're all bad. They're all controlled by the same people. And it has nothing to do with the truth. So if you're still under any sort of illusion, and it's funny because in many countries, it's quite black and white. Like if you look at the USSR, it was like Pravda and Sputnik and all that. And it was like, everyone kind of knew it was just the propaganda from the government. Today, you even go to England, the BBC. Well, that's a government channel. But your average person actually thinks it's really great. And same in Canada. I'm from Canada. They have the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is the government news channel, and people actually think it's like real. Like that's how, the government indoctrination camps, the schools, the fluoridation, all that stuff is really working. People just don't really see what's going on. It's really unfortunate. But Charlie, we've gone on for quite a while here. This is probably one of our longer episodes, and for good reason, because a lot of good information in there. But is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to at least mention before we finish up? And if not, let us know a little bit more about how people can find your book, The Octopus of Global Control. I know it's on Amazon. I know it's on Kindle. We'll put those links down below. But just finish up with anything you want if we haven't covered it, and just let people know where they can find out more information.
Well, I've got a good video you can add in here at the end of this segment that takes a couple minutes. It is the speech that's given in the run-up to Iraq in 2003. It's given by the Prime Minister of Australia and also by the Prime Minister of Canada. And there's you can find it on my Facebook page, Facebook.com/Octopus of Global Control, that runs these. It's the video that the two politicians are giving Stephen Harper and I forget the other guy's name in the lead up, and it is identical. It was given. The speeches were given, obviously thousands of miles away, a couple days apart, but the speeches are word for word identical. So if there's somebody out there that isn't quite sure whether or not what you see in the media is fake or whether the politicians are really just puppets, watch that video and you will see that they're not in control. There's somebody above them that is quite literally giving them the speech to read in order to walk us right into war. And if you think that isn't going to happen again, you're fooling yourselves. It will. It might not be this year, it might be next year, but it's going to happen. We owe it to ourselves. We have to take responsibility to be aware that when we see something like that on TV, we call it what it is. And if there's somebody in your life that doesn't quite understand these concepts or maybe is a little on the fence and you've destroyed a Thanksgiving dinner by bringing up 9/11 again like I have, go to Amazon, buy them the book, send it to them, let me be the bad guy. The way I wrote it is funny. There's a lot of really good points in there. And the quotes from the 500 different professionals that had a hand in these events, very helpful. Sometimes that's what you need. That's what someone needs to hear. They need to hear it from it. The voice of somebody that maybe they respect or trust and say, oh my God, this guy is saying that? I never knew this. I never knew that. Well, of course you didn't know that. You didn't see it on the mainstream media. So I put these in the book. Don't be afraid to buy it and send it to your friends if you're trying to wake them up.
The community of nations required Iraq to surrender its offensive arsenal, its chemical and biological weapons, and abandon its nuclear weapons program. Iraq agreed to comply.
The world judged the Iraqi regime to be a dangerous aggressor. In the interest of world peace and regional security, the community of nations expelled Iraq from Kuwait, required Iraq to surrender its offensive arsenal, chemical biological weapons, and to abandon its nuclear weapons program. Iraq agreed to comply. Iraq's continued defiance of the community of nations presents a challenge which must be addressed.
Presents a challenge which must be addressed. It is inherently dangerous
to allow a country such as Iraq
to retain weapons of mass destruction, particularly in the light of its past aggressive behaviour.
If the world community fails to disarm Iraq, we fear that other rogue states will be encouraged to believe
other
that
rogue
they too
states will
can
be
have
encouraged
these weapons,
to
the
believe
most deadly of weapons,
that they
the
too
systematic
can
and
have
applied
these most
international
deadly of
nuclear
weapons,
resolutions,
and
that
that the world will do nothing to stop it.
Yeah, and it is truly all scripted from, so many places, and most people just don't realize. We just showed the two prime murderers of two different countries saying the exact same script right before they went and bombed more people. And as I mentioned, the media is literally, it's all propaganda. If you haven't seen this, well, here's a little bit more evidence.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish things they think are true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
So, yeah, I don't know if you want to turn off that television programming, tell your friends, turn it off. It actually is programming. It actually, you can look at the patterns. It's actually literally brainwashing frequencies to get you into a trance state. This is where all these zombie movies come from, for the most part, is people actually are being turned into zombies. They don't even know. It's kind of sad. But there is some people still got a little glint in their eye. They're still a little awake out there. And if you are, you're probably watching this show. This is probably why it's only got like 4,000 views. There's probably only about 4,000 of us left out there who are still somewhat alive. But I'd like to thank Charlie for coming in, and definitely check out the book. As I mentioned, I haven't read the whole thing. So busy, but what I did look at looks really good. And actually, I did not know, Charlie, that it's on Kindle. That's really the only way I can read, because I travel so much and there's no way I'm bringing a stack of books. Just no way. So I'm going to throw it on my Kindle, so at some point I will fully read it. But I definitely suggest many of you out there check it out. We'll have links to that down below. And of course, coming up, February of next year is in Acapulco, right here in Acapulco, Mexico. So don't forget about that. We'll play a little promo for next year's conference right at the end of this. And if you like this video, and if you found some of this information interesting, really the key is to share it. We talked about this earlier. People just don't know about this information. Just get it out there. So there's a little like button down there that helps get us seen a bit more, even though we're definitely shadow banned on YouTube. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but we used to get 20, 30,000, 40,000 views on a lot of these. Now it's like 4,000, 6,000. They're really shadow banning us and blocking us in many ways. But if you do hit that like button, and you do hit that share button, and you do hit the subscribe button, it gets it out a little bit more. So there is still some ways to try to get this information out there. So if you like this video, just hit like, subscribe, share down below. It doesn't hurt. Not very hard. You probably won't end up on a government watch list. And even if you do, well, I think we're all going to end up on those lists at some point anyway. And what are you going to do? Just spend your whole life hiding from the truth, hiding from, at least standing up somewhat? Can we not just hit a like or subscribe button or a share button? Is that what it's come down to? I remember in the old days, people used to actually fight for their freedom. Isn't that what the whole U.S. civil, whatever they used to call it, was all about? We don't want to be slaves anymore. Now people are too scared to hit a like button. It's kind of sad. But hopefully you're waking up. Don't be scared. There's actually nothing to be scared of. This is how they control us, is through fear. So get rid of that fear and just hit like, subscribe, share down below. And that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
There was an idea
to bring together a group of remarkable people
to see if we could become something more.
So when they needed us, we could fight the battles
that they never could.
In time, the state will know what it's like to lose. To feel so desperately that it's right, yet to fail all the same. Dread it. Run from it. freedom still arrives.
Vacate the state. Engage all the speakers and get this man a microphone.
Fun isn't something that one considers when eradicating tyranny. But this does put a smile on my face.
Who the hell are you guys?